Cumberland traffic, Oakland 4041 uniform, departing 11 right into.
He abbreviated the pattern, tried to make a left turn to the runway. And just as he turned final onto the runway, he must have descended into the outflow from that microburst.
This is Soaring the Sky, a glider pilot's podcast, coming to you from the Mid-Atlantic region here in the United States and bringing you great soaring content from glider pilots all over the globe. We now join Chuck and our guest pilot.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Before we get into this episode, I wanted to let you all know we are losing one of our crew here at Soaring the Sky. Unfortunately, Mitch Thompson, our producer, will be leaving the team. We will miss him greatly. Mitch, we want to thank you for all your hard work and dedication in helping us grow this podcast in the soaring community. It has been a wild ride. We've had a lot of fun. We wish you the best. And if you ever want to jump back on the mic and join us, even if it's just to say hi and tell us what you've been up to, you have an open invitation. Happy soaring and fly safe, brother. Western mountain air often generates supercharged thermals, endless convergence lines, and very high cloud bases. Epic conditions for epic flights. On this episode, we join Clemens Ceipek from Chest in the Air on a soaring journey over the 55 tallest peaks of the Rocky Mountains and on a declared 1,000-kilometer FAI triangle flight across the entire state, the first ever such flight in Colorado. But there's also a dark side to such extraordinary conditions. When the air goes up extremely fast, it can come down even faster. Extreme downdrafts can be totally invisible, and when you encounter them at low altitude, they can be a deadly and sometimes inescapable trap. Shmulik Diementstein, one of the most experienced glider pilots in Colorado, recently died in just one such microburst accident. This is not an easy one to talk about. Clemens is here to discuss what may have happened on that day and how we can learn to recognize and better avoid this deadly trap. Clemens, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, hey Chuck, I'm glad to be back. It's been a while. But it's great to hear your voice again.
Yeah, same here. It has been a while. Good to talk to you. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you today about a couple topics you wrote about recently on your blog, Chest in the Air. The first one is the microburst, one of the dangers we may face someday that happened to a pilot recently there in Garfield County, Colorado. Unfortunately, he did not survive the incident. It's really scary stuff, but what can we learn from this, and can we avoid something like this?
Yeah, well, this has been a really tough one. Also for me, and for people here, because we all knew Shmulik Diementstein, who I've been flying with him actually in two-seaters before, and he was one of the best and most experienced pilots anywhere around. So this was a really, really eye-opening accidents that happened about 3 weeks ago now. And so all indications are, and I wrote a lot about it. I actually spent probably 3 or 4 days solid just doing research and trying to figure out what happened. I didn't have to do it on my own. There was some great reporting done by the pilots who were flying with Shmulik that very day. Out of Rifle. There were 3 other glider pilots, and 2 of them shared with me in a fair amount of detail their observations of what happened. So with that information and then all the research I did into microbursts, I think I was able to piece together a pretty solid turn of events. There could be new information that could be coming out. The NTSB is investigating. They just yesterday released a preliminary report, and that preliminary report was quite consistent with my analysis. But that's only the preliminary report, and they will have more information to go through. And usually in about 2 years, we will get a full report. But I would be quite surprised if it turned out to be very different from what we could see. Maybe just to briefly recap what the analysis shows that might have happened. Shmulik was coming back from a cross-country flight, very successful cross-country flight, after about 5 hours. So for him, that's was totally usual. He flew last year he flew 35,000 kilometers. There were only 6 people in the world that flew more than he did.
Wow.
So he had, so it's definitely somebody who had a lot of experience. So he came back from that flight pretty high, actually higher than normally would be considered safe. He came back to the airport with about 3,000 feet of altitude. It was only 2 miles away at that point. There was some complication on the ground. There was a radio call from a jet on the ground that they were taxiing for takeoff to the runway that Shmulik was going to use for landing. And then Shmulik offered to delay the landing. And then there was no response from the jet. So he wasn't sure whether the jet would actually pull out in front of him and take off, or if they had heard him or not. So I think he was a little hampered in his decision making. But I'm not sure if that was a huge factor in the crash. It was just a complicating. It was definitely a complicating factor. But basically, what happened is that as he was then on downwind, he's still on downwind on a normal altitude, maybe 1,400 feet, 1,500 feet above the ground, when he very suddenly got hit by an enormous amount of sink. So he got into 20 knots of sink, 2,000 feet per minute sink.
Wow.
Just out of the blue, basically. That obviously, once you're, if you're at 1,500 feet and you have 2,000 feet per minute sink, it doesn't take a minute. It only takes about 40 seconds before you reach the ground, right? It's just math.
Wow.
And so what happened is that he tried to get to tried to make a turn, a left turn. He abbreviated the pattern, tried to make a left turn to the runway. And just as he turned final onto the runway, he must have descended into the outflow from that microburst. So the sink was caused by a microburst, in all likelihood. As he descended out in his final turn, he descended into that outflow, which had a speed of, I would guess, around 50 knots. The ground station reported 43 knots, a gust right at that time. And typically at his altitude, a few hundred feet above the ground, which is where the outflow is typically the strongest, that outflow is 10 to 20% greater than on the ground. So in all likelihood, the speed was about 50 knots from the rear, directly from the back. And so his ground speed was 92 knots, which if you adjust that for the density altitudes, that basically is an indicated airspeed of around 80 knots. So if you have 80 knots indicated airspeed, but out of that 80 knots, 50 is sudden tailwind, that basically means you're flying at 30 knots real airspeed.
Wow.
And if you had 30 knots airspeed, he was flying a glider that stalls at about, in straight flight stalls about 40 to 43 knots. In the turn, it would stall a little higher, around 50 some knots. So the glider stalled and spun in, and that was recorded by a video camera, security camera on the ground. The people who were flying with him that day, they were able to watch that video, and that's what's shown on the video is the glider stalled and spun in. And once you spin in at 150, 200 feet AGL, there's absolutely nothing you can do. There's at that point it's game over, and there's nothing you can do. You can't react. You can't get the plane to fly again. Yeah. And so he hit the ground. And typically, these are the worst kind of, from a survival standpoint, these are the worst type of accidents when the glider spins in on the turn to final, because the nose will go down and the wing will hit the ground first, and then it basically accelerates even more into the cockpit area immediately, and the impact is as severe as it can possibly be. So most of those accidents are not survivable, and so it's a very tragic accident. And so it got my attention, and I think it got the attention of a lot of good people, and it got a lot of good pilots, because most of us would have been taken by surprise. I certainly personally would have been taken by surprise, I don't know if I would have done anything differently. So for me, the question really then became, what could you do differently? Are there things you can do differently? And first of all, what happened to begin with?
Wow. I mean, you're coming into land that's the sink alone is crazy. So you're dealing with that.
Yeah, the sink alone is crazy. But so let's explain with the microburst what it is. And so basically what you have, and you have microbursts can happen anywhere, and they happen actually pretty regularly. There's two types of microbursts. There's wet microbursts and dry microbursts. And the wet, basically what a microburst is and it's almost like a reverse thermal. It's like
Right.
the thermal that builds up the clouds, right? Where you have the cloud, as long as the cloud is building, um, the air is rising, and then when it gets close to cloud base, what happens close to cloud base is that the the rising air will start to condensate, and as it condensates, the condensation sets off heat energy, because that's what happens when air condensates. And extra heat energy is released, and that's what causes the cloud suck, right? So when we as glider
Right.
pilots, we fly below the clouds, and we love it.
Yeah.
That as we fly relatively close to the cloud base, there's extra energy, and you can often fly very long distances straight because you're flying in lift, and that lift is in part generated by that cloud suck. That can be actually in out in the west. This can get really, really strong, so strong, in fact, that sometimes you have to open the spoilers and to avoid getting pulled into the clouds. That happens to me, several times a year.
Yeah.
That it gets so strong. So what happens in a microburst is once the cloud is mature and it dissolves, there's rain starting to fall under the clouds. And what happens in the western U.S., where the air is super dry, usually super dry on the ground, is that the air that is falling, the rain that is falling, doesn't reach the ground, and that's what we call virga. Right, virga is basically just rain that evaporates before it hits the ground,
Right.
or snow that sublimates. It's the same thing. It's kind of and so this process of evaporation, that is the opposite of what happens in the cloud suck situation. So as the air evaporates, it gets cooler. The same thing if you're on a hot summer day and you dip your hand in water and then you take the hand out, you feel that it's really cool. Well, it's cool because the moisture around your hand evaporates, and that cools the air. And so the same thing happens with the virga. The virga evaporates, and the air gets colder. And as the air gets colder, it gets heavier. And as it gets heavier, it accelerates downward. And so that's what happened he was flying. There was virga in the air, not a lot, but there was. And so he entered into one of those just in the wrong moment. He entered an area where there was a tiny, these microbursts, they're not very big in diameter. They're usually, maybe half a mile to 2 miles or so in diameter. And just right where he was underneath that virga, that's where the downstream happened, and this microburst. And it's basically just air that is streaming straight down towards the ground. And then obviously once the air, as it streams down towards the ground, once it goes and reaches the ground, it can't go into the ground, right? Because the wind, it's basically wind blowing straight down, and the wind blowing straight down can't go into the ground. So it diverts, and it diverts in all directions, in all, 360 degrees in all directions. And instead of being a ground flow, it becomes a very strong horizontal wind on the surface of the earth. And that wind can be super strong. It's almost like a tornado type strength winds. And it's very short lived. It's very localized. But if it hits gliders on the ground, they get destroyed. There was an incident in Minden a few years back where several gliders got destroyed on the ground by a microburst. That's basically what happened. Is he was exiting this microburst area close to the ground right as this wind, this outflow from this downburst, where it got diverted towards becoming a horizontal wind. And that horizontal wind is what caused the sudden tailwind, and he lost the energy, and the glider stalled in. So that's really, I think, what happened, and he really couldn't do anything at that point.
Yeah. What can we do to avoid that? Obviously, prior.
Yes, we have to take action prior, and so the trickiest part is, and it's really hard to know, is to figure out, could there be microbursts happening as you enter the landing pattern, and that is very difficult to tell. I mean, it's hard to imagine that you would get into that situation out in the east. Because you don't have these dry microbursts, you have wet microbursts. And the wet microbursts, you can readily see them because the rain that is falling, it's pretty strong, intense rain that's falling, and you can see it. There's no question that you wouldn't see it. But out in the west, where cloud bases are super high, there's virga under the cloud bases, and it happens every single soaring day, all over the place. It's very hard to see. So the first thing to watch out for is there any virga anywhere, right, near the airfield? The danger is really close to the ground. The danger is below 1,000 feet. Above 1,000 feet, it's unlikely that you will hit a strong tailwind. You will still get the super strong sink, but you're not going to get the strong tailwind. But once you're below 1,000 feet, a downburst, a strong sink, will be followed, almost by definition, will be followed by a strong tailwind. No matter which direction you're heading, it's always coming right after you, because that's how the air flows, right? So what you can do differently is, on days where you see any warning signs, any virga, any warning signs, you can try and stay really, really high and fly an unusual pattern. Okay. So you may have to enter the pattern at 3,000 feet. You may have to fly to the end of your downwind. My strategy now, this is sort of what I took away from it for myself. On days like this, if I have to land, the first situation is recognize it. If you recognize it, the second strategy is, if there is a possibility, wait it out. So stay at a distance to the airfield, at a safe distance where you find yourself in rising air, and just wait it out. Usually these things, virga dissipates within minutes. Right. So you may have to wait 10 minutes or so, and then situation should be better. However, of course, there could be more virga coming from other sources. I mean, could be, these days are super dynamic. So it's not a black and white situation. It's often complicated to judge. So, but the first thing is wait it out. If you can't wait it out, is there another landing option where there is not such a situation in place? So you could go to a neighboring airport. If there is, right? If there's a neighboring airport where you could land and there is no virga above, well, that's a safer option. But if that's also not an option, then you have to land, then you have to figure out how can you fly the pattern in a way that keeps you safe. And the only way that you could do that, in my opinion, is that you stay super high along the downwind leg. So even if you hit 20 knots of sink on downwind, that you're still at least at 1,000 feet by the time you complete your turn to final. Yeah. And so that's my strategy now. I've actually practiced this on one of my recent flights, is just to fly such an unusual pattern, enter at 2,500 feet in the pattern, stay high on downwind, flew the turn to final with full spoilers, to get down to about 1,000 feet AGL as I completed the turn to final. And then you obviously have to allow for a little more distance to the runway. So this is the part where I think it's important to practice this, because it is a very unusual pattern. Nobody is flying these patterns normally, right? And if you're not used to doing these patterns, there's a big risk that you're going to overshoot the runway and end up in the bushes at the end. or in our case, it's a lake. That's at the end.
Oh,
But so you wanna make sure that this is something that you accustomed to different sight picture and can avoid it. So, but I mean, I think that's the only way, because if you complete the final turn at 1,000 feet and fly a very steep approach with basically full spoilers towards the runway, the odds that you're now and fly fast too. So that's the other thing. You gotta fly fast, and if you hit sink in the pattern, you gotta fly even faster. So in such a situation, my glider's normal approach speed in calm air would be 60 knots. So if there is any virga around, I'm gonna just up it to 80 knots as a baseline. So I'm gonna add another 20 knots. And if I have additional sink, I'm gonna add additional airspeed equivalent to the sink. So in Shmulik's case, it would have been 100 knots, because you would, if I find a situation like this, I'm going to fly the pattern at 100 knots. And for most people, it's like, oh my God, how can you fly a pattern at 100 knots? But in my glider, I can, and this is another part of the problem. If you have a glider that cannot fly fast, you're actually in even bigger trouble. Right, I can't fly my glider. I can fly my glider at 100 knots in the pattern, and it won't be a problem. Things will go fast, right? So you have to adjust for that. The turn to final is gonna be a bigger radius, and you got to be a really current and practiced pilot to do it. And but I think that's the only way how you could avoid the same situation that Shmulik got in. And it's still not easy to do. I could still get caught in this the same way as he got caught in it. So it's not an easy situation, and nobody that I met has said, oh, Shmulik should have done this and this, and there would not have been a problem. Nobody has said that. I actually got some interesting questions and comments from people, and so some of them are that are going to add a little addition to this, because some are not very practical suggestions. One for example was, and I think this one is actually important to mention, because there's such a misconception about motor gliders. One question that I got was, why didn't he start his motor? He has a motor glider, and yes, he has a motor glider, but if you don't understand what motor gliders have a lot of limitations. First of all, a motor is not going to help you much if you're in 20 knot sink, because your climb rate with these motors is typically 4 to 5 knots. And so you might be able to reduce a sink from 20 knots to 15 knots if you have the motor running. So that won't do any good. Also, if you're in sink, you try and get out of the sink as quickly as possible by accelerating. Well, once you have the motor, the engine mast deployed on a glider like Shmulik's, like most of those gliders with masts, you cannot fly faster than 60 knots. Otherwise, the motor will shut down because it will overspeed. And then you only have a drag device. You don't have anything else. So starting the motor is definitely a no-go in those situations.
Wings and Wheels has been serving the soaring and sport aviation community for over 30 years. They hands down have the largest and most comprehensive inventory of sailplane and soaring supplies in North America. And they ship globally. Nearly everything you'll find on their site is in stock and ready for same-day shipping. Wings and Wheels is the exclusive American representative for HPH sailplanes. Be sure to check out the Twin Shark, their latest launch. They're also now the exclusive distributor in North America for the new Just Soaring Glider Sim Pro. The team has thousands of hours of flying experience in gliders and airplanes, staffed by Adam, Kelly, Julie, and Sean. A friendly voice will answer when you call or email them. Check them out at wingsandwheels.com. Yeah, there was a lot of chatter on Facebook about the accident, which there should be. It's important to talk about it, and that's why we're talking about it. Hopefully save some lives. And
I mean, this is not a, this is it, but I mean, there are some this is one of the observations of one of the pilots flying with Shmulik that day, was that the way he put it is that some atmospheric events are bigger than our plastic sailplanes. There's a point to be made there, and there was an article in Soaring magazine called Rogue Air, I think it was called, about 5 years ago, that focuses more on these kind of extremely strong narrow thermals rather than on downbursts. It does mention microbursts too. It talks about them too, but it focuses more on rogue air events where the air is suddenly rising very quickly in a very localized fashion. We do see this with dust devils occasionally, right, in the
Yeah.
West. And there was a YouTube video. Anyone can Google that. If you go on YouTube and you say "flying porta potty," you will find one of those events where suddenly a porta potty was picked up at a park in Denver, and it just basically flew 150 feet or so straight up into the air before it
Wow.
came crashing down again. So
Oh,
whenever I watch that video, I'm like, what do I do if I fly the glide? If this happens on short final,
yeah.
right? I'm on
Right.
short final, and suddenly I hit an airflow like this that can lift the porta potty 150 feet into the air straight from a
Mm.
park.
Yeah. Wow.
It's super scary,
Yeah.
right? Super scary. And if you look at the air on that day, you don't see a lot of warning signs. These things happen right
Yeah.
out of the blue.
It's scary. I mean, I was reading your blog and about the accident. I was like, wow. I mean, you're asking yourself, what would I have done? Like you said, I mean, most of us wouldn't have probably done anything different. I mean, it happened so fast and so many things to deal with all at once and almost impossible. Could be very well impossible to get out of once you're in it.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is impossible to get out of once you get hit by that tailwind and you're at 200 feet. At that
Yeah.
point, it's game over.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so what you have to do is you have to avoid at all costs to get into a situation where a sudden tailwind at 200 feet AGL is going to cause your glider to stall. Right?
Yeah.
That is the event that you have to avoid at all cost. So
Yep.
how do you avoid it at all cost? As I said, I mean, if you have to fly a pattern in conditions where such a weather is possible, you basically have to fly the pattern in a way that allows you to complete the turn to final at about 1,000 feet, because now you avoid having to turn the glider below that 1,000 feet where that sudden tailwind will become a real problem.
Yeah.
And then you're in short final and you can fly a really fast short final. So even if it happens at that point, you might still be able to you should still be able to make the runway, and you should be able to keep control of the glider.
Yeah.
But that's a very unusual pattern. I don't know maybe there is some glider port out there that is training this, but I'm not aware of any training that is happening like this. So we have in our club, we now have a discussion about this, about, should we train for this, and how should we train for this, and how can people get prepared for it? I mean, I'm training it for myself, but that's a different thing than instructors going out and making it part of the curriculum. It's definitely, I'm not aware that this is part of any curriculum anywhere.
Well, now, I mean, it should be after this, and hopefully we'll get the word out and we'll really think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I mean, and maybe there are other solutions than the ones that I have come up with. But I mean, these are the ones at least that I'm going to use for myself. I'm not. I wrote this in my article too, right? I'm not a fatalist. I don't like to leave things to chance, especially not my life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I will do whatever I possibly can to develop strategies that I can execute that will try to mitigate those risks as much as that's possible.
Absolutely. Clemens, I did want to talk to you. I wanted to congratulate you first, but I wanted to talk to you about it also. But congrats on your first 1,000 kilometer declared FAI triangle there in Colorado. I believe a record, right?
Yes. Well, this is that's a good change of topic. This was it's a happier topic. Yes, this was the first time that a 1,000 FAI triangle has ever been flown in Colorado, which surprised me, quite frankly, because Colorado is a fantastic place to fly. It's really amazing. We have enormous, very very strong mountain conditions, very strong thermals, often super strong convergence lines over long distances that allow you to fly really fast. But the 1,000 triangle is a really difficult beast if you have a mountainous environment with multiple mountain chains, because what happens with these high mountain chains is that they tend to separate the weather patterns, right? They tend to they tend to separate air masses. So you have one air mass on one side of the mountains, you have a different air mass on the other side of the mountains, and basically what you need for 1,000 triangles, you need a day that works all across these mountain ranges with
Yeah.
air masses that are cooperating in all parts of your task area. You also need a day that starts early and doesn't blow up a few hours later, because you need the whole soaring day. You need to take off very early, and you need to be able to fly until little bit before sunset. Otherwise, you won't be able to complete the distance. So it's and then you can't have too much wind, because if you have too much wind, then the thermals tend to break up, and that doesn't work. So it's the conditions have to be right. There isn't not many days when the conditions are right. So one reason I think why it took so long to do this is that historically the weather forecasts just weren't good enough. You just and not, this is what I think we will see a lot more of these, because now it's really good. I mean, especially I really give a lot of kudos to Matthew Scudder at SkySight, because he's really developed a platform that is so easy to use. I mean, that the data was out there before, but he made it really accessible to anyone. And the weather preparation doesn't take me more than 20 minutes, 25 minutes maybe.
Oh, wow.
But that would not have been possible
Yeah.
without a tool like his tool. So yeah, so it's that was a great flight, and I'm really happy to have completed it.
You were getting up early then when you thought it was a good day and checking things out, and obviously you found the right day and you went for it. Or did you try a couple times?
On this one, actually, this was my first 1,000. Well, I had one declared attempt, but I didn't really believe that it was going to happen, and
Okay.
and I gave up on that attempt very, very early. So basically, as soon as I launched, maybe even mentally I had given up on it before I even launched. So I'm not. I think this is the first time that I thought this is a serious possibility. And
Nice.
and I mean, I was prepared the day before. Typically the way I do these things is I prepare them the day before in the evening. I look at the latest models once they're in. Usually at 8 p.m. you have the models in for the next day, which are pretty
Right.
reliable. So at that point, I plan the whole thing out, set my my turn points that are all sort of aligned with the best weather, and the direction of the task, and I look at the wind speeds across all the angles, and there's a lot of thought that goes into it. It doesn't take me longer because I've just done this so many times that I've
Yeah.
planned these flights. But so if somebody is new to this, it can take hours. But once you've done it several times, it really in 20-25 minutes you can do it. Yeah, so you plan it the day before in the morning. I'm going to review it again and see if anything has changed. In this case, remarkably little changed in the forecast, which is even a greater confidence booster, because then you say, okay, well, if that was the forecast 16 hours ago, 14 hours ago, it's still the forecast now. It's probably pretty reliable.
Yeah.
and,
Right.
and yeah, and so it worked out. It really worked out just as more or less as planned. I mean, there's always some quirks, and there's always some chinks that is going to get thrown your way, and some things that are unexpected. But for the most part, I would say 90% of that flight was pretty much as I had imagined it to be.
Well, you had some amazing pictures you shared there on your blog, and of course, you go into more detail about the flight itself. But what time in the morning did you start? When did you take off?
I think around 10 a.m. And I probably should have taken off even a little earlier. I think I launched. I think the tow started a little before 10, but I think 9:20 was probably the time when it could have. I could have launched at 9:20,
What'd you
but I think it
tow
was
AGL?
like 9:50. Oh, probably relatively high on that day. This is typical for Boulder. So basically, the conditions we have is the foothills will develop early, and the prairie where the airport is, right? The airport is 3-4 miles out into the flats,
Right.
and over the flats you don't get any air movement in the morning. So this is
Right.
usually
Right.
totally inverted. So you have to get over the foothills,
Okay.
and
I got you.
the tow plane needs a good amount of altitude to get over the foothills. Otherwise,
Yeah.
they're in trouble if they have an engine failure. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so we will not go close over the ground over the foothills. We will go over a little bit in circles before, and then we will go out of the hills.
Okay. Yeah.
I would guess I was probably at about 5,000 AGL or
Okay.
so
Yeah.
on tow. Yeah, before I released. Yeah.
And when did you land?
I think around 7. It was 9 hours to flight.
Okay.
It was
Yeah.
I would say about 9. Can actually look it up here. Landing was,
You were moving along pretty good then. Your average speed.
yeah, it wasn't super high. The average speed was around 120 kph or so. So that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
actually is not super high. So
Yeah.
it's not super high. And landing was at 7 p.m. Yeah,
Okay.
just
Nice.
2 minutes before 7. Yeah,
Nice. Had some daylight left.
I had some daylight left. Yeah, there was over an hour of daylight left.
Nice.
There was the clouds had started to fall apart. They had recycled a little bit. I mean, there was virga and showers before, and there were, but the sun came back out and it rebuilt again. It wasn't super strong at the end, but it was enough to get me back home.
Last time you and I talked, we were talking about your 14er journey, and you can briefly describe that for those listeners that don't know what that is. But I wanted to ask you how that's going.
Yeah, well, I've completed it, so
Nice.
I'm
Nice.
excited
Congrats.
about that. Yes, thank you. This is a really cool adventure. So for anyone listening, if you want to spend a summer or two in Colorado, this is one of the coolest things you could possibly do. Basically, there is a mountaineering challenge, which is basically all the mountain climbers in Colorado, what they aspire to as a career achievement is to climb all the 14ers, which are all the peaks in Colorado that are more than 14,000 feet tall. And one of our club colleagues put this out as a challenge with a trophy for anyone to do the same thing in a glider. You basically have to fly over all of those 14ers, and there's 55 of them. They're spread out across many mountain ranges across the entire state of Colorado. And so it's also a career challenge. It's not something you can go and say, okay, today I'm going to do the 14ers in Colorado. That is not a possible thing. I did measure the distance that's required, but out of curiosity. But
Yeah, what was the distance for all of them?
I think it would be about 1,200 kilometers. So from a distance standpoint, in theory, it might be possible, but that you can fly 1,200 kilometers exactly the way that all these mountains are, that is completely, it's out of the question. That is, that is out of the question. I don't think we will see this in several lifetimes, that anyone will do that. But so it's typically a career challenge. So you basically going to have to go and fly above all these mountains, and it's easy to prove that you were there with the trace. And basically, what you do is you set them up as turn points, and you just tag one of them, tag one after the other. And it took me 4 years and 4 days from my first one to the last one. And I think I'm now the 6th pilot that has done it. So there's
Oh, nice.
We're now, and so the challenge has been out there since 2008, I believe. So it took 14 years for the 6 people to get there. So it's not something you can go and do overnight. But there are 2 people who have done it within one season.
Wow.
And that's quite remarkable. And so that's what I'm saying. If somebody wants to come and spend somewhere in Colorado and tackle the 14er challenge, it's there for the taking.
Yeah, I was going to say, did they have a day job?
Well, no, you can't have a day job.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
This only works if you don't have a day job. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But this is
Soaring.
as a career challenge, it works even with a day job.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a very cool thing. It's very complicated. I mean, these mountains are, some of them are really inaccessible. You have to have days where the cloud bases are super high, and you want to have a lot of nice cumulus clouds so that you can be confident that you can fly in some of these areas where there's really no place to land. And
Yeah.
that is part of the big challenge here.
Yeah, I was going to say those mountains are pretty rugged. You better make sure.
Yeah, I mean, the San Juans, for example. I mean, those are the hardest ones. The San Juans are a very wide mountain range. It's, I don't know, distance-wise, maybe 200 miles from east to west, 150 miles east to west, and maybe 70, 80 miles north to south. And there's no place to land as you go from north to south. So
Yeah, right.
if you can stay close to 18,000 feet, which is as high as we can legally go,
right.
And obviously for the challenge, you also have to observe those requirements, and we have to observe it anyway. You basically, if you can fly around 17,000 feet, you can always keep an airport glide. Unless you hit microbursts.
Well, yeah.
But you basically want to have a day where you can stay really high.
So what are your plans for the rest of the summer as far as soaring goes?
So we have a soaring camp coming up in Nephi, Bruno Wassel's home. Yeah, so we're going to go out to Nephi as a club with a few people, fly from there for a few days. And and then I don't have specific. I'm not doing any contests this year, so
Okay, yeah.
We'll see. September is usually a good time. I still look. Yeah, there's still a few sort of things on my bucket list. Some Colorado State records that I'm looking at, and some other interesting challenges. I haven't done a border to border, for example. I've tried that twice now, and both times have not been successful. This is where you take off in Boulder, you typically fly to the Colorado New Mexico border, then you turn around, you fly to the Wyoming border, you turn around, you come back home. And shortest distance on that is 940, I believe, 940 kilometers. Obviously, you would want to try to make it into a 1,000 kilometer flight if you can. So I've tried that twice. I've made it the southern border twice, but I didn't then make the northern border. So because the days died in both cases. But that's still on my bucket list. I've not flown to Utah and back, so that's another one.
Okay, yeah.
Then there's another cool idea of, if I can line up 2 good back-to-back days. I was thinking about flying from here to Nephi, and then staying overnight, taking a tow there the next day and come back. But you need 2 days that really work across that stretch, and again, that's a lot of tiger country that you have to fly over. So you need really good days with high cloud bases and reliable thermals to make those days work.
Well, Clemens, thanks for hanging out on the podcast again. It's really nice catching up with you.
Yeah, well, it's always a pleasure, Chuck. It's you make such great content. So I keep listening to all of your guests.
Well, thank you.
It's always fun.
Yeah, we're having a lot of fun putting some content out, and hopefully everybody's enjoying it, and we'll just keep going.
Yep, excellent. Yeah, well, keep at it. It's fun.
Our longtime sponsor of the show, the Soaring Academy, is engaged in nonprofit outreach work with local area veterans and also with young people for the STEM programs at their top-notch glider port facility just outside of Los Angeles, nestled near the north side of the San Gabriel Mountains. They also have a fantastic flight school and are continuing to turn out great glider pilots every month. If you like to donate to their nonprofit initiatives or learn more about their flight school, go to soaringacademy.org or check them out on Instagram at Soaring Academy.
Hi everyone, Sergio from Soaring Master here, bringing you tips and advice about soaring. Today we're going to talk about a part of the sailplane flight envelope that not many pilots are familiar in using it, the yellow arc. The yellow arc, or the caution airspeed range, is a part of the flight envelope seldom visited by many pilots. Most have never taken their ships there, and on the other hand, some few pilots explore it a lot more than they should. The yellow arc is there in our airspeed indicators with a yellow color for a considerable extension of the speed range before the sailplane's maximum permitted airspeed for some reasons. The first is to offer pilots a good airspeed buffer to perform recoveries from high-speed dives, from maneuvering, or any other reason that might have taken us beyond the maneuvering speed. The reason why it is painted in yellow color and being named caution range is because the sailplane flying in those speeds is designed to withstand lower acceleration levels in the range of plus 4 or minus 1.5 Gs. The sailplane will be limited both in positive and negative Gs, and control surfaces deflections will also be limited to one-third of their full displacements. The reason behind these limitations are the certification requirements behind sailplane design, which drives this reduction in allowable load factor and surface deflections. And why is that? Because a sailplane structure designed to resist flight loads on the same way of the green arc up to the sailplane's maximum speed would be just too heavy, and this would affect the sailplane's performance and other design aspects. So the requirements give designers some room to make the sailplane still reach those maximum design speeds at the expense of some allowable load factor and surface deflection. And how does that affect you? Well, all sailplane manuals come with a big warning when describing the limits of the yellow arc. Only one-third of control maximum deflections is permitted, and maneuvers must be conducted with caution and only in smooth air, or something like that. That's why it's super important to consult your manual limitations before flying, because some additional restrictions, depending on the type, might be there. When ridge flying at high speeds in descent from away flights or final glides performed in active atmosphere with higher wing loadings, it's not rare to face updrafts and downdrafts that can cause instantaneous G readings of 4 or minus 1.5 Gs. The problem with flying the yellow arc in conditions like that is the risk of structural deformation, cracks, and other serious consequences from exceeding flight loads. And yes, unfortunately, we do see pilots flying and exposing themselves to that. What they are doing is reducing their margins from an incident. Does that makes the yellow arc a dangerous flight regime? No, for as long as the flight conditions and pilot handling are kept within the flight manual's limits. From the practical point of view, final glides performed in the yellow arc are considered high energy final glides, and they pose a higher risk of overshooting the pre-planned arrival height because you'll be in a condition diving at high speed and in the need to speed up more to cross the arrival within the planned arrival height. That's why every pilot must assess the atmospheric conditions ahead in the final leg to determine the starting point of the final glide and the Mach ready setting to be adopted. If the conditions are flat calm, the pilot might even consider flying beyond the maneuvering speed, but he must closely assess whether the conditions allow it. Personally, I would never consider using more than 10% of the yellow arc. For wave flying and mountain flying, things are a bit more complicated. It's not possible to guarantee the absence of rotors without condensation in conditions like that. And it pays off to be on the conservative side and maintain ourselves within the green arc when wave flying or mountain flying. Safety always comes first. So that's why I believe that it's a good practice to mainly fly in the green arc and leave the yellow arc as it is labeled, just a caution area for transitory use. That's it, guys. See you in the next episode, and for more tips, follow me on Instagram at SoaringMaster or check my website, soaringmaster.com.
If you would like to say hi and let us know where you are enjoying the podcast, we would love to hear from you. If you are a glider pilot and want to share your aviation journey, contact us at chuck@soaringthesky.com or send us a message on our website at soaringthesky.com and Chuck will get in touch with you. We hope you join us next time for another soaring adventure here on Soaring the Sky, a Glider Pilots podcast. Soaring the Sky is written and produced by Chuck Fulton, co-producer Mitch Thompson. Original music for the podcast was written and produced by Kim Spangler. Graphic design for the podcast was created by Zachary Fulton. Voiceover work was done by Michelle Perez.